Hey, what's up, comrades? So, I don't know what's going to happen for the future of the X-Men here, but I do know what happens in this issue number 40. Wow, we're getting close. There's about 30 more issues of the original run. Oh, goodness, so much. Okay, so in this issue, we start off with Beast doing some normal, what's it called, Danger Room stuff with everybody, and Iceman freezes the rope he's running on, and he gets a little cross with him. It's kind of fucked up, Iceman, for realsies. But then right before they start to bicker, Professor X summons them all, and they meet up with Jean, and they find out that Frankenstein's monster has been found in the Arctic, and that they have to go figure out where he's at, because Professor X thinks he's an android, like an alien android. Well, I don't think he thinks he's an alien android yet, but he's an alien android. And then there's a few pages of discussion about, like, wait, like, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein? Like, yes, that Frankenstein, but not really. Something else, kind of, also. Anyway, it's dangerous. So then this issue is all over the place. So the X-Men run off to the museum where the museum people, the archaeologists sort of found this guy. And they get in there, and there's a guy who's, like, trying to bring Frankenstein to life, and then, like, his homie's like, nah, bro, this is a bad idea, we shouldn't do that. And he's like, whatever, I'm gonna do it. And he does it, and they wrecking the whole place, and the X-Men showed up, and Frankenstein's like, oh, you costume people, I knew it, I'm gonna get you. And they fight, and they lose, because he's like a super android type creature, and he runs off. And so then Angel has to go around, and, like, he sees just various areas of the city where Frankenstein has been, like, smashing stuff up, been all smashy, and they're trying to figure out where he's at. And then someone at some point's like, oh, wait a second, I know what's going on here, I figured it out. He was saying something about something. He's gonna go do something. And then they go to the dock, and then they find, like, the last ship that, like, took off. And they get in the X-copter and fly after him. They land on the ship, and then they're about to fight with... in fact, they do fight with the crew. Because the crew's like, hey, the fuck are you doing here? Which is fair. But then they subdue them, and they start looking around for old Frankensteinian. Beast finds him in the hold, one of the holds, and then eventually, like, lures him out. So then they're on top of the ship, and everyone's taking pot shots at him and trying to fight him and working together, and no one's having that much luck. He's got, like, they try to lift him up off the ship with the helicopter, and that doesn't work because he has, like, magnetism in his boots. And then they hold him in place, but then that doesn't work because he can, like, create shock waves, which knock, like, Jean out. He has eye blasters like Cyclops. Essentially, they're just, like, running out of ideas. And then Professor X is like, I got a good idea. And he comes out and he's like, come, I am the leader of the masked people. You should fight, or the costume people. You should fight me, not them. And Frankenstein's like, all right, I'm going to kill you good. So he starts stomping over, and then Professor X is like, oh boy, I hope this works. And at the last second, Iceman comes over and freezes him up. And he's like, no, I will not be frozen again. I hate the ISISes. I hate it. And he hates it so much, he explodes because he's exerting too much force to not be frozen. And Iceman, as we will later learn, much later, is one of the strongest beings in the universe. So, and then he becomes a twink. But before that, he's like a super Omega level mutant, just like the Phoenix. And so anyway, so that happens, and they're like, "Phew, that was great." And then they go back, and they're like, "Hey, that was fun. So good times." And then Press is like, "I wonder how Mary Shelley, like, got the whole story about Frankenstein. That was so accurate." Yeah, not gonna worry about it. The end. And now we're continuing they have the little 5-page story at the end, continues the story of Cyclops joining the X-Men. And so Cyclops meets Jack Winter, who calls himself the Jack of Diamonds, which I love it. You gotta these fucking names. Anyway, so he has a couple powers. The first power he demonstrates is that he can sense people coming, and then he can, like, vibrate himself and others so that they can teleport. So he teleports Cyclops and himself out of, like, the cabin they're hanging out to a nuclear power plant, or not that far, because we see that, and then we see Professor X, and he's like, oh, I found them, and then they disappear. He's like, oh, they disappeared. And then we see them, like, twink or flick back in at this power plant, but then he makes some comment. It's like, yeah, I can only teleport short distances. That's why we took the train over here. And it's like, what? Okay, whatever. Anyway, he wants to smash the place up or something. Oh no, he worked for the power plant, and then he didn't like it, so he came in to, like, steal some stuff to pay off gambling debts, I think he says. And then something blew him up, and it may gave him like his powers, but it also turned his hands dun 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 into diamonds. That's why he's a jack of diamonds, which make him, diamonds are super hard. So then he can like smash things real good, and I guess it made him super strong too, because I could take a diamond, it's not going to smash through an iron girder. Lord. Anyway, so then Scott's like, I'm not going to help you. You're a bad guy. And he's like, fuck you, kid. And then Professor X shows up. He's like, you need to stop, Jack Winter. And he's like, no, I'm going to kill you too. And he's like, dun, dun, dun. And obviously Cyclops will save him in the next issue, but because this is in the past, Professor Xavier is alive. Or is he? Or is he not? Or is he really two different people at once? We'll see. So we jump into the next kind of at least 2 to 3 piece arc here with the Subhuman. So who's the Subhuman? We meet the Subhuman because he jumps in front of a subway car that Beast and Iceman are on with their dates Vera and Zelda, and knocks out the power. So Beast and Iceman go to fight him, and they fight and they go back and forth for a bit, and then the Subhuman like wanders off. Iceman tries to freeze him up like Frankenstein last issue. It's issue 41, by the way. And that didn't work, and so they're like perplexed about what to do next. They go and they kind of end their dates, and they have a nice little conversation with their smoochy girlies before they head back to the X Mansion. And they report in. The other X-Men, meanwhile, Scott, Jean, and Warren are practicing in the danger room when Beast and Iceman join them and tell everybody about the Subhuman. Meanwhile, the Subhuman goes back to his underground lair. His underground lair is an old civilization, like an old kingdom that existed under the ground. And he regales to himself the story about how for thousands of years or something, the various peoples under the earth would like fight and battle it out. And that these battles became so powerful, that's what created volcanoes, I guess. It's and then one day his father, because the Subhuman is actually Gortek, the Prince Gortek, who goes by Grotesque now. And the king, Kronos, was going to lead his people up to the surface and kill all humans or something when they got struck by like a atomic ray or atomic blast or something that killed most of the people and then left like a radiation sickness that killed the rest except for him. And then he swore vengeance against the outer world. And so he's trying to figure that out. Meanwhile, we have Jesus. We have this group of scientists at the Marvel University in New York, Metro University or whatever. And they're working on this thing that causes tremors, and they get very concerned because they're like, oh man, if we keep doing this, we could destroy the whole Earth, so we're going to stop and not tell anyone about it. And then the professor in charge, like, that's a good idea, we should do that. Gortek, or Prince Gortek, or Grotesque, the Subhuman, he becomes privy to this device, and so he works his way up there so that he can take it over and destroy the Earth, which is his plan all along, to give vengeance to his people. Meanwhile, the X-Men, now all united, return to the subway and break open the barrier that the Subhuman put up, or Grotesque, and get into his castle. So they find it empty, but they find this like civilization, and they're chit-chatting about it, and they're walking around feeling sad for whatever happened here. And Grotesque, meanwhile, has moved up into the university and has knocked out the guy running the machine and is about to use it to... Well, he's shaking him, trying to get him to tell him how to use it so he can destroy the planet. And that's when the X-Men show up. Dun, dun, dun. And so they battle it out, or they're about to battle it out, but that's where the issue ends. So we'll see if the X-Men can defeat Grotesque and save the planet. So the Cyclops introduction story continues which is the part 2 of this. So the first like 13, 14 pages are all the Subhuman story. And then the last 6 pages or so are Cyclops' origin story. So we continue on. Cyclops doesn't do anything to stop Diamond Hands over here from launching like I don't have to call it, like a column at Professor X and then destabilizing the whole room they're in, and it collapses. Cyclops and the Diamond Man, they wander off to where he needs to go so that he can get his full diamond body. And then Cyclops kind of helps him, but he's helping him because he doesn't want him to do more damage to like hurt police or whatever. Professor Xavier, meanwhile, is fine. He used his telepathy to somehow protect himself from the falling building and wheelchair us on over to where the police are going to stop the Diamond Guy, and Cyclops, worried that he's going to kill the police, blows up their car, and then Professor X knocks them all out with his telepathy. And then they team up and decide that they got to work together to fight the Diamond Hands guy, who uses the machine and successfully turns into the Living Diamond, which will be continued next issue. The Subhuman. We continue our journey with him and with the kind of boring. He's kind of boring. So we find out that Jean Grey is ensuring that Warren and Bobby cannot interfere with Professor X, and also Professor X. Warren tells Jean Grey to keep Warren and Bobby from interfering with Cyclops and Beast fighting the Subhuman over in the college. And Warren's like very concerned about this, and he's like, I don't even believe this is really Professor X, which, bravo. We don't get that little revelation till much later, but yeah, there it is. Anyway, and so Jean's using her telekinesis. Meanwhile, Beast and Cyclops are battling the Subhuman, and they destroy the machine that's supposed to create the earthquakes, and they're not doing a super great job of fighting against him, but they're kind of holding their own a little bit. And then all of a sudden, the Subhuman's like, oh, I gotta go. And he creates this like wall, one of his like infinite number of powers that he clearly has, so that Beast and Cyclops can't follow him. So they head back to the mansion while the Subhuman is searching for this like call. It's like another machine that is creating like an earthquake style system. And it gets really, this issue's like super wackadoo. Cause so they created this university created this thing. And they're like, oh, we shouldn't use it. It creates earthquakes and it could destroy the whole world. Right. And Subhuman finds it. And then Subhuman's like, oh, there's another machine somewhere. I'm going to go track that down. So he goes to do that. And meanwhile, Cyclops and Beast get back to the X Mansion, and they try to go talk to Professor X, and Jean Grey's like, no. And so she uses her telekinesis to stop them, and they are bickering back and forth. And then she's like, all right, Professor's calling us. Let's go. And so they head somewhere. I don't think it's directly in the next room. It could be. The confusing thing is we see the Subhuman meandering about in like the tunnels, and then he pops up and there's a machine with like a guy with like a mustache or something and like a wig, and he goes to like pummel him, and it's Professor X messing around with his own like earthquake creating machine. And in my head I'm like, why does he have that? What is the same fucking machine? Like, what? Anyway, and we find he reveals that he summoned the Subhuman over here so that he could stop him, and but then he's having a hard time by himself because the Subhuman is his like mutant abilities from like all the radiation from the subatomic, like the subcutaneous atomic weapons testing has made him naturally able to like block the telepathic attacks. And that's when the other X-Men show up. And they're fighting, and at first they seem like they're doing okay. They're using like these light things that Professor X has lying around the mansion. So I think they're in the mansion. But then the Subhuman like takes stuff off his uniform, and then he uses it to like reflect the light, but also reflect the laser or like the optic beams from Cyclops. And the whole thing, again, it's like, what? And so they're fighting it out, and he gets the machine going, and then Jean is trying to like turn off the machine, and she's using her telekinetic powers, and she's like, I can't do it. And then Professor X wanders over, and he's like, let me help. And at some point he's like, all right, I got to just take care of this myself. And he starts just like walking into the machine. And then the Subhuman like defeats the rest of the X-Men, and he's like, I'm so excited for this to work. I'm going to charge Professor X while he's like at or in the machine. It's super confusing. And so he charges over, and then him and Professor X, they're not really fighting. It's like Professor X like is like, behold, and the whole machine like explodes when, oh no. So Subhuman like knocks Professor X down or something again, and then like reaches into the machine to give it like more power, because I guess that's another ability he has. The fuck? And he like overcharges it or something, because then it explodes and it atomizes him, quote Professor X. And then Professor X is laying there, and Warren flies over. He's like, oh good, the professor, he's still okay-ish, so we can save him. And then the professor's like, no, I am done for. I've been hiding it from you, but I have a disease, or I have a sickness, and it's incurable. So this is where I, Professor X, not the Changeling, die. And then everyone's like, and then Warren picks him up, and everyone's like, no. And he's like, what will the X-Men do without Professor X? Guess we'll find out in issue 43. Okay, so that was kind of sad, except we know for a fact that it's not Professor X. I guess we don't know in the 1970s or whenever this came out. And it's like, oh no, we lost the Professor. Whatever shall we do? Oh, tragedy. Thy name is Fate or something. I don't know. Anyway. And then we get a wrap-up. So that's a wrap-up of that arc. And then we get a wrap-up of the Cyclops side story about his introduction. So we go back to Diamond Joe, and he's like, I am the Diamond King, or whatever. And the professor tries to talk him out of being super crazy again, and he just won't listen. So then Cyclops rescues the professor by using his optic blast. And he's like, all right, Cyclops, push me back inside this building. He'll come chase us, and we'll use the machine to turn him back into living people or whatever. So they set the trap, and instead of the guy just being like, yeah, fuck him, and going about his business, he's so arrogant, I think is the correct word, that he wants to go finish off what he started or something. So he heads in there, and the professor and Cyclops have set up a little trapsy, and the professor gives him like one more chance. He's like, hey, we should work together and not be evil mutants, and we should be good mutants, and we should help. And the guy's like, go fuck yourself. And then Cyclops turns on the machine, and it starts turning him back into like human. And the professor's like, you're trapped now. The only way to survive this is to not move for some reason, because not moving will allow the diamond to change him into regular human. But if he moves, it'll kill him. And he chooses option B and dies. And then Cyclops is like, oh, I feel terrible. I killed somebody. And Professor X is like, nah, bro, it was self-defense. Fuck that guy. You're totally great. Whatever, man. Let's start a new team of X-Men or mutants. And Cyclops is like, yeah, okay, fuck it, let's do it. And so then we drive the Rolls Royce right back to the X Manor, and we're there. And then Cyclops gets his costume with like the visor that moves up and down with his hand, and everyone's like, the two of them are like, all right, we got it. Let's do this, hooray! And that's the end of that story. So nice little wrap up of the Subhuman arc with the death of Charles Xavier, rest in peace, Changeling, and we don't find this out for like several more issues. I guess I shouldn't bring it up, but Warren's like hinting at it, and I would say it's pretty obvious it's not Professor X, but what are you gonna do? Maybe if teenage me in the 1970s would be like, oh no, oh well, that guy's a bastard, fuck him. But that's how Cyclops joined the X-Men as well. Or how Professor X and Cyclops began the X-Men together, because Professor X is going to stop being such an isolationist, and he's going to do things to better and help foster the mutants, the Homo superiors and such and such. But yeah, good stuff. Cool. Catch y'all later.